The 19th century was a grand if conflicted era for Britain. Like much of Europe, its culture and society were shaped by the interactions Britain had with other places on the globe, especially places viewed through the eyes of 19th century Europeans as somehow lesser. The racist views of many male adventurers became part of academic literature and discourse, but one woman challenged these views, and she did so alone, in an era when women were caught in the crossfire between whether they should have more rights and debates over whether women were even capable of things men did. Mary Kingsley. Mary was born on the 13th of October 1862 in Islington, London, into a household defined by intellectual curiosity but also emotional isolation. Her father, Dr. George Henry Kingsley, was an accomplished physician, writer and traveller whose restless spirit led him far beyond their quiet home. Known for his contributions to travel literature and natural history, Dr. Kingsley regularly embarked on long journeys away, exploring distant corners of the globe. Although his accomplishments provided financial comfort, they also meant his presence at home was intermittent at best, casting a long shadow of absence over Mary's early years. Mary's mother, Mary Bailey, was equally distant for different reasons. She was rigid and reserved, emotionally cold, and frequently unwell. Her chronic illness cast an atmosphere of quiet tension and melancholy over the household. Caring for an ailing mother from childhood instilled in Mary a premature sense of responsibility and a maturity well beyond her years. As the eldest child, Mary quickly became both caregiver and domestic manager, assuming roles that restricted her childhood freedoms but sharpened her practical intelligence and emotional resilience. Her younger brother Charles also depended heavily on her guidance, further intensifying her early burdens. Despite their comfortable middle-class status, the Kingsley household was unusually withdrawn from wider society. Largely isolated by her mother's illness and her father's preoccupation with his intellectual pursuits, Mary found few opportunities to engage with others of her age. Visitors rarely crossed the threshold, and social invitations were seldom extended or accepted. This isolation compounded Mary's sense of loneliness, but also nurtured a fierce independence and self-reliance. Unusually for a girl of her social standing in Victorian England, Mary received no formal education. Her parents, particularly her father, were ambivalent towards structured schooling, viewing it as unnecessary or even harmful to a young woman's character. Instead, Mary educated herself, finding solace and excitement among the towering shelves in her father's expansive library. There, she immersed herself in diverse subjects: geography, natural history, ethnography, and accounts of exploration. Books became her companions, offering an escape from the narrow confines of her domestic world. She absorbed detailed descriptions of distant places, people, and ecosystems, fueling her imagination and stoking an insatiable curiosity about the world beyond her reach. This unconventional, self-directed education profoundly shaped Mary's personality. Her mind was trained not only to absorb knowledge passively, but also to critically analyze and question established perceptions of distant cultures. Her father's eclectic collection provided a unique intellectual framework free from Victorian educational orthodoxies, allowing Mary to think beyond traditional boundaries. She internalized an openness and empathy toward different cultures that would later distinguish her from many of her contemporaries. Her father's periodic absences also had an impact on Mary's emotional development. Though his emotional detachment was painful, his adventurous spirit offered Mary a rare role model. Her fascination with his distant expeditions became a beacon guiding her dreams. Conversely, the strain of her mother's illness, compounded by her father's neglect, left Mary emotionally isolated, yet fiercely determined to forge her own identity. By her late 20s, Mary Kingsley was an unusual young woman shaped by paradoxical circumstances. Domestic constraints had given her practical skill and emotional maturity, while her solitary, bookish upbringing fostered intellectual independence and curiosity. Though socially inexperienced, she was remarkably self-assured and resourceful, qualities honed by years of quiet struggle within her household. When both her parents died suddenly in 1892, Mary found herself at a turning point. Finally freed from her caregiving responsibilities, she was determined to step out of the shadows of her early life and embrace the adventure and intellectual exploration that had captivated her imagination since childhood. For nearly 3 decades, she had been confined by her domestic responsibilities, caring for a chronically ill mother and managing household duties in an emotionally distant environment. With her parents gone, Mary, now aged 30, found herself suddenly and entirely free, at once liberated and uncertain about her future. But her father's vast library, filled with vivid accounts of exploration and adventure, had long seeded within her a fascination with travel and distant cultures. Rejecting the conventional Victorian advice to tour Europe, she boldly chose West Africa, then still largely enigmatic, often misunderstood and widely considered dangerous by European standards, as her destination. Kingsley's decision reflected both personal and intellectual motivations. She sought not only the adventure and knowledge her father's books had promised, but also a test of her independence and resilience. Africa represented a stark contrast to her cloistered upbringing, an opportunity to finally experience firsthand the places and peoples she had only imagined from the confines of her father's study. In December 1892, she meticulously planned her journey, consulting maps, guidebooks, and scholarly articles with an almost scientific precision. She had no formal training or prior experience in exploration, yet her preparations hinted at the determination and capability she would soon demonstrate. In the summer of 1893, Mary Kingsley departed England for her first journey to Africa. Her initial itinerary took her to British colonial territories along the West African coast, including Sierra Leone and Angola. Despite advice to the contrary, Mary travelled entirely alone, refusing offers of escorts or companions that many felt a woman required. Even more strikingly, she did so in full Victorian attire, wearing cumbersome corsets, ankle-length skirts, high-collared blouses, and sturdy leather boots. This insistence on traditional dress was partly strategic, as it signaled respectability in colonial circles, but it also symbolized Mary's unique blend of conformity and rebellion, outwardly proper, inwardly driven by a fiercely unconventional spirit. Upon arrival, Mary immediately began collecting natural specimens, focusing particularly on ichthyology and entomology, fish and insects. Working methodically, she documented and preserved hundreds of samples, many previously unknown to European science. Her approach was rigorous and professional, which prompted admiration and astonishment from colonial administrators and local traders, many of who initially doubted that an untrained, solitary Englishwoman could accomplish much beyond superficial sightseeing. However, Mary quickly transcended such limited expectations. She not only collected specimens, but also immersed herself in the social landscapes of the region she visited. Kingsley had a remarkable ability to move comfortably between European colonial outposts and indigenous African communities, carefully observing and recording their interactions without overt judgment or prejudice. Her observations challenged prevailing Victorian assumptions about the supposed superiority of European culture and the perceived primitiveness of African societies. Instead, she documented the complexity, sophistication, and humanity of the communities she encountered, recognizing the subtle dynamics often missed or dismissed by other European travelers. Mary also developed practical skills to facilitate her travels. She learned from local African guides how to paddle dugout canoes through dense mangrove swamps and how to navigate intricate river systems. She learned to identify edible fruits, plants, and fish, skills that allowed her to undertake longer, deeper explorations away from the security of European settlements. Her resilience and openness won her respect and cooperation from African guides, who appreciated her willingness to learn their methods rather than impose her own. Her first expedition, which lasted several months, provided Mary with confidence and clarity about her future direction. Returning briefly to England in late 1893, she felt restless and impatient. already planning her next expedition with greater ambition and scope. Her journals from this initial journey vividly captured her experiences, navigating the waterways of Sierra Leone, learning traditional fishing techniques in Angola, and confronting European stereotypes that she increasingly saw as misguided and unjust. Her writings, at once humorous, critical, and deeply insightful, began to reshape European understanding of West Africa and its people, setting the foundation for her growing reputation as an explorer, scientist, and ethnographer. Kingsley's initial expedition to West Africa was not merely an escape from her earlier life. It was a purposeful act of self-definition. Her choice of West Africa, an unusual destination for a solitary Victorian woman, reflected both her determination to challenge societal norms and her personal need to assert independence. This first journey confirmed her lifelong fascination with West Africa's cultural complexity and ecological richness, igniting a passion for exploration that would guide her subsequent, more daring expeditions and firmly establish her as one of Victorian England's most remarkable female explorers. In December 1894, Mary Kingsley returned to Africa with heightened ambition, driven by the need to immerse herself even deeper into the continent she had grown passionately attached to. Her second expedition marked a clear departure from her earlier journey. This time, she intended to navigate truly uncharted terrain, far beyond the relatively familiar British colonial settlements of the coast. She selected Gabon and Cameroon as her destinations, regions largely unexplored by Europeans and widely considered hazardous by her contemporaries. Kingsley herself acknowledged the scale of her undertaking, writing wryly in her diary,
"I have never experienced difficulty in finding a trouble to suit my requirements. It is always at hand, particularly in West Africa."
Beginning her journey along Gabon's imposing Ogooué River, Kingsley quickly encountered the harsh realities of exploration in a tropical landscape. The river was swollen, its currents treacherous, and its banks densely carpeted in mangrove swamps and towering rainforests. Yet Mary navigated these obstacles methodically, often paddling alongside local African guides, learning their techniques for survival and river travel. In her celebrated travelogue, Travels in West Africa, she vividly recounted these experiences, blending practical advice with her distinctive dry humor.
"It is advisable to wear skirts, because the natives think you are mad otherwise, and dangerous people to deal with. And even if you are known to be mad, it is just as well to avoid showing it openly, if you wish to be popular and respected."
Despite these restrictive garments, which she insisted upon partly as a mark of respectability in Victorian society, Mary navigated flooded swamps, dense forests, and precarious rivers with surprising ease. Her journals detail the physically demanding aspects of her travels, from arduous hikes to the careful documentation of natural specimens. On this journey alone, Kingsley collected thousands of insect and fish specimens, including many species previously unknown to European scientists. Her work was meticulous, carefully cataloguing and preserving each discovery despite oppressive heat, humidity, and ever-present tropical disease. The defining achievement of this expedition was her extraordinary ascent of Mount Cameroon. Towering at over 4,000 meters, its slopes were thickly cloaked in tropical rainforest and volcanic terrain, presenting formidable challenges even for trained mountaineers. Kingsley, however, faced these challenges dressed in heavy Victorian clothing, long skirts, high-collared blouses, and tightly laced corsets. Her account of the climb is both vivid and characteristically humorous.
"Why I did not fall down 50 times a day was, and is, a mystery to me. The paths were continually blocked by immense fallen trees. I scrambled over them somehow, or else crawled beneath, marveling at my survival all the while."
Her successful summit was not just a remarkable physical achievement, but also symbolic of her determination to prove the capabilities of women in exploration, an implicit rebuttal of Victorian assumptions about gender roles and female fragility. Beyond her scientific and physical accomplishments, Kingsley's second journey deepened her ethnographic interest in the indigenous cultures of Gabon and Cameroon, especially the Fang people. Unlike many contemporary European travelers, Kingsley approached local communities with genuine curiosity and respect, rather than condescension or missionary zeal. She took great pains to understand their social structures, religious practices, and complex belief systems. Her writings challenged prevailing stereotypes of Africans as primitive or inferior, asserting their profound humanity and dignity. She was particularly critical of European missionaries who, she argued, fundamentally misunderstood African religions and customs.
The African has his religion as deeply seated in his soul as you have in yours, and when you come to disturb it, you make him a poorer man, not a better one.
Kingsley's empathetic approach allowed her unprecedented access to local ceremonies, rituals, and community life, significantly enriching her understanding and resulting accounts. Her notebooks from this period record detailed descriptions of Fang's spiritual beliefs, highlighting their complexity and internal logic, qualities frequently overlooked or dismissed by European contemporaries. She wrote, for example,
"The difference between our ideas and those of Africans consists chiefly in method, not in aim. What we regard as superstition, they see as practical and logical means of dealing with a dangerous and uncertain world."
Her writings became valuable resources not only for understanding African societies, but also for critiquing European imperial attitudes and colonial policies. Mary returned to England in November 1895, brimming with a wealth of insights, observations, and a uniquely vivid perspective on African societies that would soon challenge entrenched British stereotypes. Initially, however, she found herself confronted by skepticism from some of Britain's leading scholarly institutions. While individual acquaintances and personal contacts had admired her remarkable courage and meticulous scientific work, larger scientific and geographical societies, particularly those dominated by men, hesitated to fully acknowledge her contributions. To these traditional institutions, Kingsley was something of a paradox. She was undeniably accomplished yet unsettlingly unconventional. Her gender alone drew initial dismissals, as Victorian Britain was hardly prepared to accept a woman without formal scientific training or institutional affiliation as a serious explorer or scholar. However, Kingsley's persistence, coupled with her natural eloquence and incisive intellect, rapidly shifted perceptions. When her book Travels in West Africa appeared in 1897, it was immediately recognized as something extraordinary. The narrative overflowed with dry wit, astute observations, and vivid anecdotes that captivated a broad readership beyond the usual circles of geographers and ethnographers. Readers delighted in her playful yet precise style, as when she described her struggles with African fauna.
"It is my experience that the West African crocodile never lets you down in the way of entertainment, provided it be the crocodile that starts the performance."
This engaging manner enabled her to subtly yet effectively challenge widespread colonial assumptions. Beneath the book's humor and adventure ran a strong undercurrent of sharp criticism aimed at the simplistic and arrogant colonialist perspectives prevalent in Victorian Britain. Kingsley unflinchingly critiqued British missionaries, whom she accused of undermining indigenous cultures through their misguided efforts to impose Western religious and social norms. Such outspoken positions inevitably provoked controversy, prompting public debates about Britain's ethical responsibilities and cultural arrogance in Africa. Kingsley's popularity surged, and within months she was sought after as a public lecturer, speaking to crowded halls across the country. Her confident, authoritative presence on the podium disrupted Victorian gender conventions. Rather than adopting the expected role of demure lady traveller recounting quaint experiences, Kingsley directly engaged scholarly debates about colonial policy, ethnographic methodology, and intercultural understanding. Audiences initially taken aback by her directness quickly warmed to her compelling mixture of intellectual rigor and unpretentious humor. Yet controversy followed her relentlessly. While many praised her fearless critique of British imperialism, others, particularly those closely aligned with missionary societies or colonial enterprises, resented her interference. The heated discussions surrounding her lectures sometimes spilled onto the pages of contemporary newspapers and journals. Despite their disagreements, however, even her most vehement critics acknowledged Kingsley's intellectual sharpness and the strength of her arguments. Her words compelled Britain's scholarly elite to confront uncomfortable truths about their nation's role in Africa, forcing even reluctant institutions to reckon with her ideas. Building upon her success, Kingsley published her second major work, West African Studies, in 1899. This more analytical book expanded upon her earlier critiques, advocating explicitly for a more enlightened colonial policy, one rooted in empathy, deep cultural understanding, and collaboration, rather than domination and exploitation. In it, she wrote,
"The African is not a child, nor is he inferior, but simply different. It is this difference, not inferiority, that the European mind has failed to grasp."
Kingsley's writings profoundly influenced subsequent generations of anthropologists, ethnographers, and colonial administrators. Her nuanced approach, emphasizing respect for African societies and cultures, gradually reshaped European academic discourse, introducing concepts of cultural relativism long before they became widely accepted. Though initially met with skepticism, her work had lasting impact precisely because it combined accessible storytelling with rigorous argumentation. In late 1899, Britain descended into conflict with the Boer republics of southern Africa, igniting the Second Boer War. Although Mary fiercely opposed the war itself, believing it to be morally unjustified and a stark example of colonial aggression, she could not sit idle while British soldiers suffered. Driven by a deeply ingrained sense of compassion and responsibility, she resolved to volunteer her services as a nurse. For Mary, this decision was entirely consistent with the ethical principles that had guided her explorations and writings, a profound empathy for human suffering coupled with practical action to alleviate it. Mary arrived in Cape Town in early 1900, quickly immersing herself in the chaotic and desperately understaffed military hospitals. Conditions were dire, medical supplies were limited, sanitation was dangerously inadequate, and infectious diseases spread rapidly among the wounded soldiers. Kingsley threw herself into her work with characteristic efficiency, quickly identifying weaknesses in hospital management and proposing improvements. Her practical skills, sharpened by years of solitary exploration and self-sufficiency, allowed her to bring order and discipline into the chaotic wards. Within weeks, her calm authority and tireless dedication earned her enormous respect among fellow nurses, doctors, and soldiers alike. Soldiers particularly valued her comforting presence, often commenting on her unfailing kindness and gentle humor in even the bleakest situations. Despite her tireless efforts to safeguard others, Mary herself became vulnerable. Amid the overcrowded hospital wards, typhoid fever was rampant, and in late May 1900, Kingsley began exhibiting symptoms of the disease. Initially dismissive of her own worsening condition, she insisted on continuing her duties, determined to support the soldiers she saw as suffering more deeply than herself. Her health, however, deteriorated rapidly, forcing her colleagues to admit her to a bed in the same hospital she had worked so hard to improve. Confined to bed, Mary endured a brief but fierce struggle with typhoid. Doctors and nurses, many of whom had become close friends and admirers, made desperate attempts to save her, but the fever swiftly overwhelmed her weakened body. On the morning of the 3rd of June 1900, Mary Kingsley passed away quietly in a Cape Town hospital ward, aged only 37. She sent away those around her before her final hours, not wishing them to see her in a weakened state. Her death was felt deeply by those who had witnessed her remarkable bravery and kindness. Even among strangers, the loss seemed profound. Soldiers, nurses, doctors, and local authorities all mourned the spirited, independent woman who had defied Victorian expectations with grace, courage, and compassion. Honoring her final wishes, Mary's friends arranged for a burial at sea, an act meant to symbolically unite her with the continent she so deeply admired. In a poignant yet characteristically humorous twist of fate, the solemn ceremony was marred by a moment of dark comedy. As her coffin was lowered gently over the side of the ship into the Atlantic Ocean, it unexpectedly floated back to the surface, bobbing stubbornly in the waves. The shocked mourners watched helplessly as the coffin resisted sinking, creating an awkward silence that quickly turned to nervous amusement. One witness later remarked dryly that Mary herself would surely have appreciated the absurdity of the situation, given her famously irreverent sense of humor. Eventually, after considerable effort by the crew, her coffin was weighted and carefully consigned once more to the ocean's depths, finally sinking beneath the waves. News of this incident spread quickly, becoming part of Kingsley's enduring public legacy, an affectionate anecdote that reinforced her lifelong reputation for wit, practicality, and resilience, even in death. Mary Kingsley's remarkable life profoundly challenged Victorian notions of gender roles, redefining possibilities for female explorers and intellectuals. In an era dominated by rigid expectations, she not only ventured into physically demanding, uncharted territories, but also fearlessly critiqued prevailing European misconceptions of Africa and its peoples. Her vivid, insightful narratives, filled with wit, empathy, and rigorous observation, effectively dismantled simplistic colonial stereotypes and helped reshape European attitudes toward African cultures. Despite her untimely death, Kingsley's influence persisted. Her extensive biological collections, meticulously catalogued, remain valued resources in prestigious British institutions such as the Natural History Museum. Academically, her ethnographic writings significantly contributed to the emerging fields of anthropology and intercultural studies, advocating a nuanced and respectful approach to understanding other societies. Her incisive critiques of British colonial practices positioned her as an important early voice against racial prejudice, imperial arrogance, and cultural misunderstanding. Today, Kingsley's legacy endures as an icon of exploration, advocacy, and intellectual integrity. Her courageous journey through the African wilderness symbolizes a life devoted not just to curiosity and discovery, but also to challenging injustice. Kingsley's enduring story inspires continued exploration of both physical frontiers and social boundaries, leaving behind a legacy that remains as relevant and powerful now as it was in her own extraordinary lifetime. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any new documentaries.